some experience with Pro Tools. I've never been a particular fan of how it looks in Windows. And,
that is true.
It just looks very it has this Windows Vista Aero look to it from 2004 or something.
It is a nightmare. Yeah,
the actual graphics that they've added are not too bad. They're similar to the Mac, but you just look at it and think, why does this look like 2004?
Hello and welcome everybody. This is the inaugural episode of a new podcast about spatial and immersive audio. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Wagner. I run a very small YouTube channel where I talk about digital media, game design and spatial audio. In my day job, I'm a digital media professor and department head at a research-intensive university in Philadelphia. And next to me is Sam Hawking. And Sam, how about you? What's your deal?
How would I introduce myself? I'm not in a spatial audio or immersive audio industry as such. My main job's IT administration, basically, in a large college. And my long-term interest is music engineering as a hobby. And more recently, the last 2 or 3 years, particularly spatial audio, and making music in that format. But to be honest, mainly I like the tech side of it more than the actual making an actual piece of music side.
And you're quite active in all kinds of forums, right? So I think if there's like an immersive or spatial audio forum, there's a Sam
I'm probably
Hawking
there in some respects. Yeah. So that's where I kill a lot of time.
So we felt that the world needs another podcast about immersive audio, and that's what we're going to try today. If in case you are watching this, there is one of two things that happened. Either this podcast has become popular, in case good for us, or you have a really good search engine, in case good for you. This is primarily this is essentially a pilot episode that we are running here, and we hope to do that monthly. So, Sam, what do you think we should talk about on this podcast?
I think we should talk about the new DAW from Studio One not a new DAW, but a new feature in the DAW, Studio One.
And in general?
And in general, I think everything that's kind of happening within that month or leading up to the month podcast, everything to do with spatial audio, immersive audio, Dolby Atmos, ambisonics.
So all things immersive audio.
Yeah, I think that's where we're going to go with it. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what we want to do. We don't have by the way, we don't have a title for this podcast yet. Do you have any ideas?
Not yet. I reckon we get the pilot out of the way, and then we'll have an idea of what to call it.
I was actually thinking of the Sam show. Sam for spatial.
No.
Well, Sam for. Hear me out.
Okay.
Hear me out.
Go for it, yeah.
Sam for Spatial Audio Monthly.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Or it could also be a recursive title, like Sam for Sam and Michael show, right?
Very good. You're too clever, Michael.
Anyway, for those of you who are listening to that on YouTube or watching it on YouTube or any other distribution format where you can actually leave comments, let us know what you think this podcast should be called. We at the moment have not really any idea yet. We will see. Kind of let us know, and maybe you come up with something that we can actually really use.
Yep.
So with that, let's get to the first topic. Now, the first topic that we said we will talk about is, and you already alluded to that a little, is Studio One has an Atmos workflow now. So Presonus published an update to Studio One that includes a Dolby Atmos workflow, and that came a little bit unexpected. Did you know that in advance?
No, I hadn't heard anything.
That was completely unexpected, right?
I mean, I know I assume. I think might have seen some documents on it, but yeah, Dolby have an SDK, a software development kit,
Yeah.
to allow their renderer to be included in other software. So I mean, yeah, it was always a possibility, but it was it multi-channel capable DAW before?
No, it was
No.
not. They
So they
kind
went
of
the
it was
whole.
they
They
went
went
they
the
went
whole.
the whole 9 years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they want
And
the whole.
I've heard that from, I can't remember his name, the CEO of Bitwig, who was one of the original developers of Ableton, and he said on it was funny enough on a podcast. He said if we did go down the spatial audio route, we would go the whole hog. We would go multi-channel. We would go Dolby Atmos, ambisonics. So that's quite an interesting sort of comparison parallel with what Studio One have done. They've gone straight in for for the fully featured
Yeah,
Dolby Atmos workflow.
that was actually something that surprised me,
And a
and
pretty one as well.
yeah,
It looks pretty.
it is, and it is super usable. So
Yeah, yeah.
it is exceptionally easy to use, and as I said in one of my videos, that this was just a 0.5 update, so it wasn't even a full version update.
Yeah, no.
And if you think about how much you actually have to do in order to to get multi-channel into a digital audio workstation, especially with all the features that Studio One has, that is actually quite a thing. And the fact that they kept that sort of under wraps is a little bit surprising. I'm not quite sure if there are a lot of people kind of doing rumors about Studio One. That's probably not going to happen a lot. But the fact that nobody talked about that in advance is
Yeah, no. Just wonder whether depends what their kind of marketing strategy is. Sometimes they want things to sort of leak out through people that are beta testing or whatever, but sometimes they just want it completely private. Although I'm not sure what market they're fighting Studio One. I suppose potentially Pro Tools, when they come out with their internal renderer, they might have wanted to get in before them, and it be, if you keep it all quiet, the impact is greater because it's just all the news in one go. So it's quite a nice way to do it sometimes.
And this is actually one of the things that a lot of people have reached out to me recently and kind of asked me, what is the best store to get started? What's the best digital audio workstation now to get into? So Sam, what do you think?
Yeah.
What do you use, by the way?
Okay, well, when I started in the kind of 90s, well, probably late 90s, I was still using an Atari ST with Cubase on floppy disks.
Jesus.
So it was purely a MIDI setup. I don't even think it was really capable of any real time, wave based audio. It was purely MIDI. So I had a Yamaha SY, I think it was an SY35. I had an old drum machine, Roland drum machine, and a couple of other things. So yeah, for a long time I was a Cubase user. But then I kind of drifted out of just being interested in music entirely, really, and then really got back into it probably about 5 years ago, and resubscribed and got my license to Cubase again. But then I found was it it would have been Ableton first, and then I never actually bought Ableton the DAW. I carried on using Cubase, but then for some reason Bitwig announced their first release, and the very first videos of it showed it all running on, I think it was a Surface, not a Surface tablet. I think it was a Surface Book, and it was at one of the music shows. I can't remember which one. And they were showing, this clip launcher based workflow, the non-linear workflow.
And I think they also pioneered kind of this touch interface, if I remember correctly.
And
right?
yeah, and I think that's probably why they were using the touchscreen Surface Book, because it could show off that interface as well. I just thought, oh wow, okay, maybe I don't need to actually buy a physical mixing desk. I'll just buy a very large touchscreen, and I'll you'll touch the faders directly. And I thought, oh yeah, I'll just keep it all in one place. You can move it around the house. You can make music anywhere. So that's kind of the route I went down. So pretty earlier adopter of Bitwig, but obviously for spatial audio, that's useless because it was only a stereo DAW. So at best, all you could do was kind of create pseudo multi-channel buses out of multiple tracks.
But you do have quite a few videos on I think on your YouTube channel, right?
If you're interested in how to twist Bitwig into various ways, then check out my channel.
So for those of you who are watching, we're going to leave a link in the description.
Yeah. But from that, I kind of the first step, because I was a Windows user this time, there was no Dolby Atmos solution at all. So there wasn't even really on my radar, even though I was aware that it was done on Pro Tools with the Dolby Atmos production suite at that time. Now they've combined the production suite and the mastering unit into one. But yeah, at that time that didn't exist. And so I think my first exposure to really mixing in Atmos was DaVinci Resolve, because that was one of the first DAWs to include it as an internal Dolby Atmos renderer. But before that and alongside it, I've always been a big fan of the Mach 1 spatial audio system, which is based on SPS from the name rings a bell in my head and I can't grab the name. Angelo, he's one of the spatial audio kind of academic.
Farina.
That's the one. Sorry, yeah. Listeners, you'll get used to me completely forgetting names, because that's basically how my brain works.
That's the same. I'm the same thing. I'm completely the same thing. I completely sympathize and empathize.
But I will do my best. And this is only a pilot episode. For the real one, I'll actually write this stuff down before I start. So I read quite a lot of papers that he'd released on SPS. This way of not you're kind of just taking the audio exactly as you've recorded it at the position you recorded it. Generally, it's in an 8 speaker array format of front left, front right, rear left, rear right, and then the same underneath you as well. So it's you could use any number of channels, but 8 is a kind of the most minimal way you can work. But because it's essentially just pairs of stereo, all of your stereo effects and all of or the limitations of having a stereo DAW, that was one of the first ways I could actually work in spatial audio in Bitwig, because its whole design lends itself to stereo workflows. And if you speak to Dylan there at Mach 1, that was kind of a big reason for why they chose SPS as kind of their starting point for their framework, was because you could take everything that you do in stereo and carry on using it in the spatial audio environment. So that's always been quite interesting to me. I think a lot of people get put off by it because it's almost so basic and so simple. Maybe they don't really think that it's spatial audio because they're comparing it to hearing something binaurally in Dolby Atmos or some sort of effect that they think they should hear and they don't. And it's very much a system based on having to use a head tracker, because there is no binaural element to it. In fact, if you just fold down the stereo, if you just fold down the Mach 1 8-channel spatial audio format, it recreates the stereo input perfectly, because it's really not changing the stereo input. And that was quite an attractive thing as well, because you can seamlessly create all your formats in one hit, including stereo, and it almost null back to what you began with because it's not changing anything. Which I've always quite liked the simple is better approach to audio.
That's always a good idea, right? Keep it simple. The KISS principle.
Yeah. So anyway, that's
the Mach 1 is an interesting one. We should probably kind of do an episode about that in the future. Kind of for those of you who are watching this podcast on video, once again, we're going to leave links in the description below. And if you have a chance, join us on our Discord community. The Mach 1 developer is actually active there, so if you want to talk to them, you can do that. But that's certainly a good starting point. Now you're using primarily Bitwig. Do you think there's a chance that Bitwig will actually implement a multi-channel version of Bitwig?
I think eventually, but I don't think probably the demand is there for them, because they're not only is it a niche door in a niche area of this non-linear sort of type workflow, because only really Ableton and Bitwig in that kind of area, and Ableton is much bigger than Bitwig in terms of user base.
But kind of, I always felt that what's currently missing is sort of a DAW that has a non-linear arrangement editing tool, like the clip launcher in Ableton. There is sort of that. I mean, you can do like multi-channel with Digital Performer, and Digital Performer has something like that. But that is really kind of I mean, it's an interesting DAW, quite frankly, but it is a bit of an annoyance to work with it, because it kind of it feels a little bit antiquated at that point. I'm also, quite frankly, slightly surprised that even though they're working with 12-channel audio, they have not yet implemented Atmos, which is interesting. But sort of, it would be nice to have either Ableton or Bitwig be capable of that, because that's one thing that I'm currently missing, really. The ability to have some non-linear editing possibilities like you have in Ableton or Bitwig.
Yeah, and I think that both DAWs lend itself to the modulated kind of approach to how you're not necessarily just making music in this kind of sequential note-based way. You're using modulation and controlling things in a kind of a random way, but one thing can control another thing, and then that thing can control another thing, and you can chain together all these modulated effects. And for spatial audio especially, I think that really lends itself, because you're not just limited to this just panning, like say some of the sound particles plugins, where they're seriously modulating the effect of things moving around, or breaking it into multiple kind of objects almost, or particles as they call them. That whole thing, you can essentially recreate your own flavor of that in a DAW like Bitwig and Ableton, because it's just got such a powerful modulation system where everything can be controlled by something, be it a step modulator or simple LFO or a wavetable even, or different envelopes, MSEG envelopes, things like that. So I think once people get into or accepting they can just make spatial audio as easy as stereo, then I think it would be more adopted. I think the Fiedler composer is probably opening that up slowly, I think.
You can. That's true. I mean, you can use the Fiedler audio or Dolby Atmos composer with all these DAWs.
And that's why I use in Bitwig. That's how I pretty much do, unless there's something very specific that I can't do. The only limitation is you don't have that multi-channel bus or channel to put a multi-channel effects on, and so I don't know how deep you want to get into it, but there's ways you can get around it using Plug Bejewel and Cache View Element to kind of emulate having a multi-channel bus somewhere, but it's not ideal.
I mean, that's also kind of something we might want to talk about at some point, kind of how to do that. But I'm really looking forward to one of those DAWs really implementing multi-channel. In Ableton, actually, that should be very straightforward, because they could simply go through Max for Live, right? I mean, there are multi-channel possibilities to work with Ableton. There's this envelope for Live system, and there are others that do that. So by going from Max for Live, and Max for Live essentially has multi-channel capabilities, so you could actually do that. You could even kind of do it in a way that loads in plugins, I think. I'm not quite sure, but I think it's possible.
Right, yeah. Because it's a bit like, is it Plug Data, I think, is a system similar to what Max for Life is built on, if I'm correct. So it's like a modular a way to build things in a modular fashion, but you can also load VSTs into that modular workflow as well.
Yeah.
I often think a lot of the time you don't really, especially in a non-linear DAW, you don't necessarily need this classic tracks, groups and buses and sends and returns and stuff like that, because you can essentially route stuff from anywhere to anywhere anyway, and there's devices to essentially bring in multi-channel already. It's just that they're not formatted as a multi-channel thing for a plugin to recognize. So the plugin just thinks, I'm just in a stereo DAW, I'll just open up 2 channels, even though essentially there's no reason why you couldn't route 16 channels of audio to it. It's just that the DAW doesn't let you do it, or the framework of how the BST works in the DAW doesn't allow it. I'm sure it's just a case of connecting the inputs and outputs of the VST kind of workflow. But that'd be interesting how far a DAW like bit would go with it. I think at the moment it's just not an area they need to probably get into in terms of their development. I don't think anyway. But it'd be nice.
I'm not so sure. Honestly,
really?
I think kind of a couple of 2-3 weeks ago, I probably would have agreed with you. But the fact essentially how exceptionally easy that is in Studio One, I think that's going to open up that possibility to a lot of people. And I'm honestly expecting that Digital Performer eventually will kind of use Atmos, because their entire client base is film composers, right? And they need to produce in Atmos. So I think they're going to do that. And then essentially Pro Tools is going to come out with an internal renderer soon. I think even if Dolby Atmos is not going to stay around forever, I think the fact that these DAWs need to have some sort of multi-channel capability, that will probably kind of be a thing. Yeah. Did you work with do you have any experience with any other DAWs? I mean, did you ever work with Cubase or Nuendo or Pro Tools or anything else? What's your opinion on those?
Some experience with Pro Tools. I've never been a particular fan of how it looks in Windows. And,
that is true.
It just looks very it has this Windows Vista Aero look to it. It is 2004 or something.
It is a nightmare. Yeah,
the actual graphics that they've added are not too bad. They're similar to the Mac, but you just look at it and you think, why does this look like 2004?
That's it's always the first thing. I once in a while I try it out on Windows, and then I said no. It's like
it just doesn't inspire confidence. I don't know. I don't know whether they do it on purpose, just as we like Mac so much we don't even bother updating the styling of the Windows version.
I mean, there are a couple. Honestly, there are a couple of big companies that are just tied to one particular operating system. Like I know, kind of. I'm in the game audio space. If you think about Audio Kinetic, for example, Audio Kinetic runs on a Mac only in a wine bottle.
Right.
That's essentially what it is. So it's just emulated. And I think Pro Tools is the same thing. They just know that their user base is Mac only, and Windows is almost an afterthought. But I do think that what they've done recently is actually quite interesting. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the way kind of they're now where you can essentially route the output of the renderer back into Pro Tools, which essentially allows you to.
Is this the aux system?
The aux in-out, which essentially allows you to do all the re-rendering on the renderer, and then essentially have the re-renders come in and separate outputs. And I think that is super interesting. Pro Tools actually, I think, had some really nice advantage over the last couple of months.
No, I mean, I fully understand why in a much more commercial setting, it would be the DAW to probably go with, partly because you're probably going to receive Pro Tools format sessions, and you don't want to go and recreate that from scratch every time from if you're working on a different DAW. And I know there's obviously workflow features very specific to those, like huge track count kind of workflows. And for myself, more from a just DIY sound design sort of fun background, you want a lot of that stripped away, because you just don't want to be thinking about, oh, how do I create 128 send effects returns with one click on the keyboard. That sort of stuff is not why you're using the DAW or a specific DAW. But whereas in a commercial environment where time is important, all of those little efficiencies are kind of what keeps you with that DAW, I think. But
that is true. That is very true.
I think a lot of people forget that that's why it is industry. It's not industry standard because it does anything in terms of the music any better. That's still a creative process, I think, mostly. As long as the DAW allows you to record instruments and mix them and export a flawless stereo, master file, then that's all the DAW's got to do for you. But yeah.
Now, kind of, we would be kind of, people would get upset if we don't mention Reaper, right? Reaper is also an option that you have. Did you ever work with Reaper?
I have, yeah. It's like I call it the Linux of DAWs.
That's a good one, yeah.
It's hugely powerful. The scripting side of it is what would attract me to it if I wanted to seriously sort of create something more unique to me, and I had the time to script things and create new workflows. I think it's great for that. I'm very much about simplicity, and it's not the prettiest looking DAW, and a lot of it is just piled in as these loads of drop down boxes and check boxes, and it's very much like an Excel spreadsheet type DAW. You know what I mean? It is though. Kind of
passionate Reaper users would tell you that you can always kind of you can change everything. You can change the theme, right?
Yeah, and that puts me in my place every time. So I can't say anything about that. But I'm just talking personal preferences. I want it as minimal and as
but to be perfectly honest, kind of you do get used to that, and once you persistently use it, you start to realize how everything is kind of really laid out. So I do see a lot of professionals moving away from Pro Tools to Reaper, and I can understand that, because the functionality is just there, and if you're working with a DAW professionally, you frankly don't care how it looks.
No. I mean, Pro Tools isn't particularly pretty. It's quite a complex looking DAW. It's not an intuitive DAW unless you know, because you've used it for so long, that you know where to
it isn't
find a solution.
It isn't exactly pretty either. That's completely correct. So if somebody comes around and asks what DAW should I use, what's your opinion? I have mine, but what's your opinion?
For spatial audio,
if I want to get into spatial audio, what's the perfect DAW for me at this point?
Well, I think it would be Studio One now. I think from what I've seen, I think your favorite DAW with Fiedler Composer is possibly the most accessible, but it's not quite so intuitive. I don't think the Studio One workflow is you don't even think about it. You just create your track, send it to Atmos, done.
Yeah.
It's like 20 steps shorter than doing the same on Pro Tools. Probably 10 steps shorter than doing it with Fiedler. I think yourself. I think.
I do agree, and that's actually one of the things that kind of has really changed over the last couple of weeks, because before Studio One came out with that, essentially I would have said pretty much the same thing. Any digital audio workstation, your favorite is your digital audio workstation with the Fiedler Atmos, Dolby Atmos Composer, unless it's Pro Tools, because on Pro Tools it's a bit of a drag. Yeah. But if you have Pro Tools, then essentially you can do other things as well. But Studio One really nailed that one. They didn't.
They've really thought about the importance of like the UX and how it looks. 'Cause how something looks is so important to how intuitive it is. It could be a really intuitive thing, but if it just doesn't look intuitive and it doesn't guide you along the process, it doesn't matter how good it is, it's never going to be popular. But yeah, they've really thought about how do we make this, because do you remember when DaVinci Resolve first had Atmos included, it's quite a convoluted kind of process to routing things.
It is convoluted, isn't it?
It's fine once you've done it a few times and you understand why you're doing it, but at the time, you think, well, it just doesn't. You can't even get audio out of it initially.
Yeah.
Don't hear anything because you haven't or you do hear something, but it's only ever stereo. Because you've got to do this whole patching thing of physically clicking on a block and then connecting it to another block. So yeah, but you know, they were quite an early adopter of it, so I guess you.
Yeah, and kind of, kind of the one thing that annoys me about DaVinci a little bit is the fact that, and I get that question a lot, that is, even though you have the Atmos workflow, you can't really do much with it in terms of film production, right? So if you actually want to include Atmos in a movie deliverable, in a video deliverable, you actually have to export that in this kind of IMF exchange format that you can't really play on anything.
Yeah. I know. So it's almost like a music solution in a.
It's a music solution in a video editing software. And it is not.
And it doesn't even do the music stuff very well either.
Exactly. Because the automation is a drag, and kind of it's a very inexpensive way to get into. But now I think that we have Studio One. That Studio One is just a better option. Yeah.
No, I think you're right.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see what Pro Tools come up with the internal.
That's true. Honestly, that's true. I'm actually looking forward to that.
Yeah.
But kind of we are kind of curious what our viewers think. What's your opinion? What would you prefer? Would you like to use kind of spatial audio in Ableton or Bitwig? Give us some comment in the comment section below, or wherever you are kind of listening to this podcast. And if it has a discussion forum, use it and kind of let us know what you think.
Definitely.
Yeah, we are definitely interested. So let's move on to I actually wanted to talk about something that you do, and that is sort of this Demixing. Can you tell me a little bit what that is and what the purpose is and what your goals are?
Sure. Yeah, I still quite early days. So there's a lot of music out there that doesn't necessarily have the assets of what made the final stereo track. So you've got maybe political reasons between managers or labels and artists, and people don't necessarily actually have the individual stems to create spatial audio or a new mastered stereo mix even, because there's either no recorded stems, they were recorded over. I mean, I'll come on to some of the stories later on of what's happened to some master tapes and things like that, where especially some bands through the kind of the most expensive era of the sort of tape process is they would actually use the same tape to record multiple tracks. So they just record over what they just made because it saved money. You didn't have to buy another tape. And it is stories like this. So there's all this music out there that is already in stereo format across the last 60, 70 years or whatever. But to create a Dolby Atmos or a remastered stereo mix, you don't necessarily have these stems to get more control of the. Well, it's not a remix because you're not changing the song structure at all. It's exactly the same song. You just don't have access to anything other than the stereo master file and possibly an a cappella and an instrumental, which is kind of how a lot of stuff arrives. And so actually this is purely born out of using Mac 1. is that I soon realized, because Mac 1 was perfectly nulling the spatial audio version back to stereo, or with stereo, I realized, if you can extract enough of something out of the stereo version, you can actually null that out almost while, by nulling out, I just mean inverting. Say you had you separated enough of the vocal out of the master. You could then null that and get some panning control, because you've essentially carved a hole out of the surrounding kind of mix. And so that I was messing around with some. It was called Deezer Splitter, which is a free open. I think it's open source. Deezer are I think they're a French music or film streaming service, I think. And
I didn't know that. So
yeah,
that is kind of part of that streaming service, because I think that algorithm is used in many.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, lots of people use it. Isotope RX. I don't know if they still use it, but a lot of the rebalance feature in Isotope RX is based on Deezer Splitter, apparently. In fact, Deezer Splitter lists Isotope as using it on their GitHub.
I didn't know that was kind of connected to the streaming service. That's interesting.
Yeah, but then one of the ones I'm using at the moment is connected to Facebook. So it's strange why. Anyway, so this is what they call AI. The official term is instrument source separation. ISS is kind of the academic term of it. And it's basically using deep learning and artificial intelligence to say, this is what a vocal sounds like, this is what a guitar sounds like, this is what drums sound like. And then I don't think there isn't a time to go into the depths of it, but essentially you're teaching an algorithm to spectrally separate out parts of the stereo mix into their individual stems again. So you're kind of reverse engineering what the mixing engineer did. And so the technology is to a point where you can get enough of these stems back out of the stereo clearly enough that you get a little bit of control over them spatially to create an Atmos mix. And I shared some results with some of the forums that I'm on, particularly some of the Atmos engineers, and they started coming to me. I've got this track. We don't have any assets for it. All I've got is the 44.1 CD. Can we get the vocals out, because they want to do an Atmos mix of it? And the kind of the upmixing kind of side of Atmos is a bit frowned on, especially by a lot of the Atmos engineers. They're quite high up in kind of the ranking of audio engineers, because hardly anybody's got an Atmos room, and even less have got an Atmos capable studio. So they tend to be quite big. I mean, I can't really say who I've worked on, but if you went on YouTube and looked at one of the tracks, there would be 50 million or 100 million plays. So they're quite big artists. But this political reason is you can't always get the stems, or sometimes it's purely because the way the AI separation works, everything sums back to the stereo again. There's no difference. It nulls with it. So you can separate it all out. As long as you play it all back together as it's been separated, it's essentially still the stereo mix. And I think I know this to be the case. Some engineers like the fact that they are already working with the stereo master, already separated, but in a spatial, Dolby Atmos environment. So all of the matching of the Atmos kind of dynamics and sound to the stereo is kind of already done for them, because all they've got to do is play it all together, and they've still got the stereo track. So, but what they do like is they've got the control that I can add a bit of compression on the vocal, or I even deverb the vocal that has been separated, so that they can then add a more modern reverb or multi-channel reverb that suits the Atmos kind of sense. So it's a side hobby job really. It's not a career. There's not enough work to do it as a career yet. But essentially they come to me. I use AI and everything that I've learned about all the tools that are best for each task. Because there's certain ways of demixing requires certain knowledge. It's not like you can just throw it all into one product and it spits out stems. You've really got to understand what really does get a trumpet sound the best out of this style of music. So it's partly knowing what all the technology is out there, but partly you need it's not something you can quickly pick up. There's several hundred hours just reading up about stuff and experimenting, and I think that's why they come back to me and say, "Oh, I've never heard anything separated that well before." It's mainly because probably nobody's really, or no engineer themselves would have had the time to research what I did, so they're left with what they do have with RX and stuff.
This kind of stem separation kind of technologies are getting better and better, right? I mean, the FL Studio now has that included, for example, right? And they're getting really, really good. So kind of, but did I hear that right? So you're actually kind of working with some interesting people, but you can't really say who it is, right?
Yeah. I think because it's a little bit, it's still, I think, to some extent viewed a little bit like upmixing, where it's kind of like cheating.
Like cheating,
but some, rightly so. I mean, it's not, they rank how good an algorithm is. They call it an SDR figure, higher the better. And that's the signal to distortion ratio. So, signal to distortion ratio. And what they're doing is they've got a data set of already mixed tracks and their source stems from the studio. So they know exactly what that bass sounds like, that vocal sounds like, because it's already separated. But then they test the algorithm on the mixed stereo track.
Mm-hmm.
And so they then compare what's demixed with the original stem. And that signal to distortion ratio is how much is left when you null the stem back to what you've separated. And that residue is basically considered the noise because it didn't exist in the original stem. The algorithm's taken more than it should out of the stereo master, or even less out. So so you essentially you're saying, right, this nulled 90% of what's separated is in the original stem, 10% actually belongs to something else. Once you get down to just a few percent difference, the human brain doesn't really notice it, especially once it's all played back together. What generally happens? Say we've got something that's 80% separated. Like guitars and pianos and stuff like that mixed together are very difficult to separate because they're a very similar sounding instrument in a similar frequency band. And so you might not necessarily be able to pull those out really cleanly to separate them. So what would happen is, as you separate them in the Atmos space, say you put the piano, up here, and the guitar, bottom right or whatever, far away from it, it would start to rip. It would rip the kind of the stereo mix apart. You'd have this kind of hole in the middle because all of the original stem hasn't dragged down to where the guitar is. Some of it's still left up with the piano, and so that's the greater the separation in terms of this SDR, the higher the SDR ratio. So the more signal you've managed to separate, basically, the more control you've got to process it with other effects or move it around kind of the Atmos space. Obviously, for a lot of Atmos, because they are trying to match the stereo mix anyway, they are generally just keeping everything up against the wall at the front, and then it's just, little they're just adding little bits around the room for color. It's not so it kind of lends itself quite well because they can spatialize it to enough of an extent that it's a bit like upmixing in terms of, oh yeah, that sounds spatial, but they don't have to go through the whole. A couple of engineers have said it saves them probably half a day to get the same kind of result. But not all music lends itself. Some music just won't separate. It's just it's not even that it's not trainable in terms of the AI. It's that the processing and how it's arranged and put together just makes it too there's just not enough original information of the stem still in the stereo mix because limiting and compression, and some just styles of music, like you get something with crazy loud drums all the way through it, you cannot separate out a fainter guitar out of all that kind of white noise around it because the noise doesn't exist in the stereo that you want anymore. It's been disguised by everything else around it. So
that's super. That's super interesting. So kind of and kind of people come to you and then essentially you help them separate that stereo file into their stems so that they can sort of turn that into a Dolby Atmos kind of mix. That's super interesting. That's super interesting.
Yeah,
so this is sort of a side kind of a hobby that you do, right?
Yeah, I mean, because I don't think like I said, there's not a huge number of Dolby Atmos studios.
Yeah.
Not yet. There's not yet, and there's not a huge amount of people doing this AI kind of demixing.
Yeah.
People are aware of it because of it's kind of included in various softwares like Isotope RX and things like that. But people aren't really aware of where the kind of cutting edge side to it is happening, and it doesn't exist in a software program you can buy. It's in GitHub, and it's just word of mouth, and it's people experimenting. It's a lot of it doesn't even exist as a program. You have to go onto like a Google Colab resource, and you kind of build the project because it's in PHP probably or Python rather, and you build the project in the cloud basically, and then you use some GPUs that Google let you kind of rent to train the models, and some of it might take 2 hours to separate, or with a quite a high-end GPU running at maximum for 2 or 3 hours. It's a huge amount of data that it's using. So that is quite interesting. So kind of because I was thinking, right? So if you're using these software that you can purchase, Repex for example, or any other kind of thing, it's not that. First of all, it's not that straightforward to use. You need to really know what you're doing in order to get the best quality. But from what you're telling me, essentially, you actually kind of go beyond that by really kind of using the algorithm and kind of taking advantage of that algorithm and optimizing that and running that through a kind of GPU-based processing, kind of artificial intelligence processing, neural network, whatever, deep learning processing. A process to get the best quality possible, right? Yeah, the software generally like RX and Ripex, that's kind of a moment in time of the industry in terms of they've got a model that is their kind of data set of how they're gonna decide what is a guitar, what is a vocal. But it's a snapshot in time, a lot of it. That's why the Isotope RX is relatively dated now. It's if you looked at the SDR score of Isotope RX rebalance, even though it's considered industry standard, it's probably ranking about, I don't know, 200th highest in terms of how you could separate that same piece of audio. It's quite low down. I mean, a lot of them.
200. So essentially, kind of rank 200. So they're like 199 above it, or what?
I mean, this is an ongoing kind of chart.
Oh, okay.
But there are people that rank this. There are people that they will they will rate every algorithm, and it's ranked in this SDR. We'll share some notes at the end.
Yeah, that's actually that interesting.
So you can
see,
well. And it will tell you this is Ripex, this is Isotope, but it's not a fixed kind of ranking because different music separates better in different algorithms. So it's just a general one on one data set of music. It's not saying this is 200th best. It's just giving you an idea. Of
no, I understand.
So yeah, no, it's I mean, the Beatles' last album we were pretty certain it was done using very, very similar techniques that I use and others as well. Where they had a little bit of luxury because they had the I think it was back then they used a 3 or 4 track tape, so they kind of had maybe a vocal and a guitar on one track and a bass and another vocal on another. So they already had it separated, a little bit, and then they just used the AI to separate it again until they had everything individually.
That's interesting. In our university, kind of, we are in Philadelphia. Actually, we have an archive of some of the famous studios that were in Philadelphia in kind of decades ago.
Yeah,
and kind of we have these archives where you have all these tapes. And I think that's actually quite interesting. So even if you have these tapes, right? So because they're usually like a couple of tracks only, right? You still need to kind of separate it, do some separation in order to have everything fully separated.
They didn't have multi-track capability then. They didn't have up to until the kind of the 60s. Things were either just recorded in one go on one tape in one room. And you just had to play well, I suppose. There's minimal editing probably, like tape editing and stuff. But I think the first couple of Beatles albums they're on, I'm pretty sure it's 3 tracks. So there's just two or three instruments kind of recorded at the same time. But obviously, if you want to take that into an Atmos space, you can't move the drums and the guitar. Well, say you wanted the guitar move to the right of the room, but obviously it's essentially mono, so it's not in any space of the room, so you could move it anywhere. But you can't take with it the drums as well because it'd probably sound a bit weird. You'd want the drums more centered. Well, that's a classic case for using AI source separation. Is you can move the drum to the center and move the guitar to the right. So
that's super interesting. So are you kind of if people have interest and kind of questions, can they come to you and
Sure, yeah. So the website is demix.me. So DEMIX.e. ME. And my email is sam@demix.me.
Nice. So if there are any questions, right? So contact Sam. He is the expert when it comes to demixing. If you guys have any thoughts about if this is a good idea, kind of, or any questions, hit us in the comments or kind of contact us directly.
I do. While I'm kind of growing the business, I do offer a free first track as well. So nice. If you can try me out for free, basically.
That's nice.
And people do use it quite a lot, to be honest.
I imagine. I
mean, the hope is you will come to me eventually with a whole album, and I'll recoup it. But it can be quick, but sometimes you get a piece of music that you'll spend half a weekend on it because it's just not. There's just not a simple way to do it, but I'll always, I'll take the rough with the smooth. If it takes me an hour or two, brilliant. But if it's going to take longer, then I actually learn a lot more from the ones that are a challenge, obviously. So I take it. I take it as a learning, a reason to learn as well, because it forces you a little bit. Whereas, hit me up. That's fine.
Yeah. Cool. So kind of there's there's essentially two more things that I wanted to talk about. Actually, I wanted to talk about one thing and you about the other. And the first one is, this is actually something that also came completely unexpected, and that was the Binaural render for Apple Music that Audiomovers put out. I was kind of wondering what your opinion is about the kind of the way Logic implements this head-tracked Binaural rendering. Do you have any experience that? I mean, you're a Windows user, right? I mean,
I've talked to Audiomovers support, and I've talked to a couple of Atmos engineers. So the way that a lot of Atmos is QA'd for Apple Spatial is you export the DD plus JOT MP4 from the renderer, and then you sideload that onto a phone or an Apple device with AirPods, and then you can play that as Apple Spatial. But I think even for a lot of probably musicians, it's quite a horrible process for everybody, to be honest, because it's you've got to literally transfer physical, well, not physical things, but you've got to transfer files around between users, and it's not obvious whether am I listening to spatial audio or is this just 5.1, or you think they're loading it onto an iPhone and they just end up playing it in the browser because they've clicked on a link or whatever, and then it's definitely not spatial, Apple Spatial. So well, there's two sides to it. There's the QA in terms of your client listening to what you've mixed, and that is traditionally always either you've got to come to the studio to listen to it, or you have to play it on an Apple device yourself that the engineers sent you. But the engineers will often loop back from Logic the 7.1.4 output that would be going to their speakers normally. They'll route kind of a monitoring copy of that through Logic, like what you're talking about with the aux routing of Pro Tools, and then they'll bring it back into Pro Tools so that they can then monitor it on
that's interesting.
Their headphones. But obviously that not necessarily AirPods, but so I think the AirPods enable the head tracking. Is that right on Apple?
Yeah, the AirPods Pro and the AirPods Max, and then you have the Beats Studio Pro, I think, and the Beats Fits kind of thingy. So those are enabled. So that is actually quite interesting. So kind of they have multiple DAWs simultaneously and then just route it back into Pro Tools.
That is how I know some are doing it, which is highly. There's such a lot of hardware and
that is
purchasing as well. I mean, I guess if you're spending £20,000 on a vintage compressor or whatever, a Logic license is and a Mac to run it on is probably not really thought about very much. But for everybody else, it obviously is an issue. So I think that's where Audiomovers have come in.
That's super interesting. So all these people don't need to do that anymore. They just pop the kind of Audiomovers plugin. And for those of you who kind of are listening to it who don't know what the Audiomovers plugin does, it essentially replicates the rendering that is done in Logic in any other digital audio workstation. So you can have head-tracked binaural audio in exactly the same way you would listen to it in Logic in any digital audio workstation that is multi-channel capable. Obviously, it has to be on a Mac because the entire framework is Mac-based. But
I believe that even Logic, the Spatial, the Apple Spatial renderer isn't actually in Logic. It's in the operating system. So it's actually on
that's
Mac OS.
Possible.
It's actually on Mac OS itself, and this is why the Audiomovers plugin is Mac only. Because what it's actually doing is taking your audio from your DAW, running it through Apple Spatial renderer, which is part of Mac OS, and then bringing it back to the plugin again so that you can hear it as Apple Spatial.
Yeah,
I think that they wouldn't really go into detail. They just said, the algorithm is Mac only.
Yeah, no, I kind of the way.
But another engineer said, it's using the Apple Spatial API, and that's why it won't run on Windows, because they can't put the API into a Windows VST.
Exactly. So essentially, kind of my understanding is that's sort of a kind of an API, a programming API that they can simply access, and that, as you said, is part of, because quite frankly, probably most of Apple's software is using that, right? So if you have Apple Music, or it's probably the very same renderer that is used there. So that is super interesting. Now, I actually originally wasn't that particularly interested in that particular part of Logic. It was only I had a chat with I think it was somebody from I forgot. I think it was somebody from Sweetwater. And we were kind of chatting around, and we were talking about head tracking. And I said, well, the problem really is in this case that head tracking, it's kind of annoying to set up. You have to have a head tracker, and then you put it on your headphones, and then you have to connect it, and you have to constantly. And he was looking at me like I didn't know what I was talking about. And it turned out essentially kind of because he was using Logic all the time, and kind of in Logic you just put on the efforts max and it works. You don't have to think about anything. It just works.
They're just using Logic as an external headphone renderer, really. That's right. So it's a massive way to go about it in terms of complexity. But anyway.
So kind of that kind of started me thinking about how, and then I looked into it, and kind of that is really super convenient. But as until like last week, measured at the time we were recording that was only available on Logic, and now it's available everywhere. And that's.
You can imagine if you're working on, an important Atmos release, and a lot of releases are only released on Apple Music as well. You've got to remember. So the chances are much higher that it's only going to be experienced in Apple Spatial, because I think generally a lot of Apple Music subscribers are Apple device owners as well. Generally, because you've already got the account because you're an Apple user. Whereas if you're a Google or an Apple user, I think generally that's true. But you can imagine as an engineer, every time you wanted to evaluate the mix in Apple Spatial, you'd have to render out a DD plus jog, transfer it to your phone, then listen to your phone, and then go back to the mix and make your edit. You have to do that every single time you change your mind about something. It must have been an absolute nightmare.
Yeah. Well, no more.
No more.
Actually,
although
at the time,
saying that an engineer did say it's not exactly the same as what you experience from Apple Music once it's streamed. I think
that is possible. Yeah,
I think what he's getting at there is the DD plus jog MP4 is obviously compressed and it's spatially coded.
Yeah.
And then the 7.1.4 is pulled out of that, but it's a lossy 7.1.4, whereas I assume the Apple Spatial API on the Mac OS is being given pristine 48K audio, so it's working on a lot higher quality audio to begin with. So, which a lot of people don't realize with Apple Spatial is the spatialization is done on the lossy 768 kilobit audio. It's not done on 48K audio.
Interesting. I didn't know that either.
So you're kind of spatializing something that is already lost some data. It's minimal. You can't really tell, I don't think, like the compressed audio to CD sort of quality audio anyway. But
I mean, it's still kind of. I think even if it's not the same, it's still kind of. Honestly, from the perspective of a consumer, really. Obviously, kind of. I am not a. My how should I put this? Essentially, kind of, I'm not as trained in hearing things that like audio engineers are trained to hear, right? So kind of, I can't quite frankly hear the difference between the lossy and the lossless compression. But at least not if it's at the level.
I think a majority of people, general consumers don't. Right. I've been to concerts before, and I think I was at a Kraftwerk concert, and I was the bass was just overpowering everything, and I just thought, this is really just doesn't sound good at all. And then I commented it at the end to the guy that I was sort of sat next to, because the bass was brilliant, I loved it, but from an audio files perspective, it was it was awful. Nobody would ever agree that sounded good, but he he didn't notice that, and I think a lot of people don't. They just accept, oh, it's making sound. I can recognise the song, and it's loud. And that's good enough.
Well, I think that's an entirely different story, but that's an interesting anecdote. But kind of it is sort of true that if you're not an audiophile, you're probably not going to hear the difference between what comes out of the Audiomovers.
And it doesn't bother you, and it doesn't bother you either.
It definitely helps. It definitely helps kind of doing it that way. So that I thought was really interesting. Now, by the way, at the time we are recording that, I just had a video of mine going online that kind of talks about how to use it in Studio One. It actually turns out that this plugin works exceptionally well in Studio One. So if you don't have to purchase Logic if you don't want to. If you don't want to go the Logic route, you can actually stay in Studio One, and you have pretty much exactly the same functionality that you have as you have in Logic. So another win for Studio One. Not a sponsored podcast, by the way. We're just fans.
We'll get them on now.
Yeah,
we're giving them a good enough shout. We can get the CEO on for a chat.
Press on us. Where are you? Okay, but kind of, I would actually be interested to hear from our audience if they have any thoughts about kind of the Apple Music kind of rendering. Is this something that you guys think is important? Do you use that? Have you tried the Audiomovers plugin? Is this something you think you would like to use? Is it good? Let us know. Once again, comment in the comment section below, or you can also join us in our Discord community, where Sam is currently more active than I am, quite frankly, because he as I said before, he's active everywhere.
I'm active everywhere. I do some work in the day, you know.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder.
Real work.
I sometimes wonder. Okay, there's one more topic we wanted to briefly touch, and that has to do with effects, and sort of the fact that even though everything seems to be moving towards multi-channel, kind of where are the effects, Sam? Where are they?
They're not there. Not all of them, anyway. Yeah, it's kind of it's a very slowly released kind of thing, isn't it? There's probably, well, not so much now, but during the sort of growth of sort of plugin based music production, you know, there's got to be thousands and thousands of reverbs, and there's thousands and thousands of delays and all sorts of effects, but they're never, very rarely released as multi-channel versions. Mm-hmm. I thought that was quite a strange, not a strange phenomenon. It might just be that the market's not there, and 5.1 and surround wasn't huge, was it? So I suppose maybe to some extent there's a culture of it's not in the sort of subconsciousness of the plugin developers so much,
right?
Until now, I think it's growing now, but
it is starting to grow, and as you said, sort of, you know, kind of, I think in the reverb space, you know, kind of there are obviously kind of multi-channel reverbs, you know, kind of like the ones from Liquid Sonics. Those are the ones that they're usually kind of quite expensive, quite frankly, but kind of really good ones.
Well, that's more from the film, probably from the film,
right?
Kind of world in a way, right. I think, but I don't know.
I actually had an exchange with Blue Cat Audio. They released this plugin. How is it called? Plugin Script, where you can essentially script your own plugins. Yeah. And that is 8-channel. And I told them, if you guys do that, if you change that to 16 channels, that would be super interesting. I think I talked to them like, 3 years ago, and they said, essentially came back to me and said, yeah, that wouldn't be that complicated, but that never happened. So it is really kind of, as you said, I think there's a certain lack of awareness. And you know, kind of, and quite frankly, even if plugin developers try that, quite often the results are not particularly good. I'm not going to name any names, but I had companies reach out to me that gave me like access to pre-release versions, and then something would not work correctly, and nobody would notice that, because one of the issues that they have in Dolby Atmos in particular is that the head channels, so the overhead channels. It's usually really, really difficult to hear if there's something wrong on those. And I had plugins that actually kind of completely messed up the overheads, and nobody noticed that. Even high-end engineers didn't notice that, and that's just because it's sort of an afterthought, really, right?
Yeah, I mean, even with speaks in a room, some engineers, they can't really tell what they've done behind them or above them. I know it's not because there's a fault. It's just how the human hearing's working to some extent.
It's exactly right. So we are evolved to hear kind of horizontally. Kind of we very rarely got attacked from above. That didn't happen. Kind of the tiger came from the front and not from.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I think it'd be good. I'm sure it's just about numbers and sales, whether they include it or not.
Yeah.
Or the cost, the overall cost of a plugin. I mean, the Liquid Sonics they're not particularly cheap, so they're
not.
They can probably justify the engineering that went into programming it, but
kind of they have this Liquid Sonics, by the way, for those of you kind of listening, they have this very nice cross-grade kind of option. So once you have one Liquid Sonics plugin, essentially everything else becomes cheaper and cheaper, and that's actually quite good. That you can get to the point where things are really really inexpensive, but you have to have one to start
to begin with. The other ones, the other good ones. There's an Acon digital immersive reverb. That's a really nice one.
Yeah. The Acon ones are good. The kind of the Acon suite.
They kind of go under the radar a little bit. Acon. They're kind of in the kind of isotope RX space mastering, but then they've also got some quite interesting plugins as well. But their reverb allows you to kind of pan the reverb around as if it's an object as well, so you can kind of follow what you're doing with the actual audio object, which is
that's interesting. That's interesting.
Quite cool, because most of them just move the object kind of through the reverb that is static, or the object just moves around the reverb, which is just surrounding you. Whereas that one, you can actually kind of place the reverb.
That is a plugin you need to purchase separately, because I think most of the plugins come with the Acoustica kind of DAW, right? That's actually kind of.
I think there might be a suite. There might be a suite of everything that you can buy for millions of pounds, but I'm sure it is available on its own as well. But they're a big favourite. And then we got and then you got the opposite end of the spectrum, like Red Rock
Sound,
Sound, who I think they originally a lot of the plugins were already released as stereo versions for
the iPad.
For the iPad and Rewire and stuff like that, was it? Or
the kind of the most of I can only say for the they appeared on my radar once they migrated their plugins over to the desktop systems, but I think they were iOS plugins first, but don't quote me on that. I'm not entirely sure. But because kind of they have this kind of code that is built on the iOS system on a Mac, they actually come in as Audio Unit version 3 plugins, which is interesting. Which essentially means, I actually did a video about that you can actually migrate stuff. If you're working with Logic, for example, you can migrate stuff from Logic on the iPad to Logic on the Mac. But they kind of really jumped on that, and kind of I think their workflow is really nice. Their user interface is super convenient.
No, the way that they handle the different variations of grouping individual channels together. So if you only want to apply compression on the front, left, and right, but then you want slightly different or slightly less compression elsewhere, you can do that all through one.
Yeah,
all through one. But obviously, it's all kind of multi-channel object bed based. But there's no way around that, other than maybe the Fiedler Space Lab, which is kind of more of an object based reverb, where it becomes part of the Atmos kind of workflow itself, which is quite interesting. I don't know if you've played with that much, Michael, but
I did not as much. I mean, I played around with it, but not as much. The one thing that always annoys me a little with those reverbs is that essentially usually they just flood the channels, right? So kind of there are very few reverbs that actually take the positional information of the objects into consideration. So Space Lab does something. It's also not entirely. It's not kind of. I always the effect that sort of the position has on of an object on the reverb is actually minimal, even if sort of the effect exists.
But the Space Lab itself kind of becomes the almost the panner in a way.
It becomes the panner, yeah.
It's a strange workflow, but you can get some quite nice effects from it though. So
yeah, that's true. And it's also not particular. It's quite expensive, but I think it's a good one. I kind of really like that as well. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can use it in a regular stereo door is sort of a big plus. So if you're working with anything that doesn't have multi-channel, kind of Space Lab is currently, I think, the only option that you really have in order to at least have a convenient workflow, right? I mean, there are probably kind of more technically kind of challenging kind of solutions to do that. But if you have a stereo door and you want to just kind of work with Atmos and you want to have like a multi-channel reverb, then that's really the only convenient option that you have.
Yeah. But I think, definitely, I think the main gap is delays. There's very, very few multi-channel type delays where like a multi-tap where you can set each delay to come out of a different speaker, for example. There's very little like that out there. Whereas that's exactly what you want a delay to do in a spatial sense.
You could
can emulate it yourself, but
and you could convert into ambisonics and then there are a couple of ambisonic solutions, right? So you could go back and forth between into ambisonics and then, for example, use something like the Audiomovers kind of plugins.
They are the exception, But I think, hopefully we see some more not just reverb and compression, but things that actually make use of the space. More creatively.
You're absolutely right. I think that is a missed opportunity.
So I know some of the sound particle stuff definitely goes much more into that way with the synthesizers and the plugins and the effects.
The sound particle stuff, by the way, that is something that actually that surprised me. I actually had the sound particles plugins for quite some time, and I didn't realize that they were multi-channel. It was actually kind of only when I had a chat with Tony from Sound Particles, and he showed me, and I said, "Well, you guys hit that really well." I mean,
if you only ever load them onto a stereo track or stereo bus or whatever, they're only ever going to do stereo. So you think, they're just stereo plugins.
So it's sort of a little kind of option somewhere. That's kind of, if you don't really know about it, it was quite interesting. So it's kind of, I'm assuming that is on purpose in order to make sure that people don't because quite frankly the big market is still kind of people who are working with stereo, right? It's not.
I think the plug-in kind of frameworks that they're developing with, a lot of them kind of automatically adopt what the DAW is telling them that they can do. So if the DAW's saying you can be 5.1 on this track, then they'll only expand itself up to 5.1. Annoyingly, it doesn't let you go beyond what the DAW is kind of telling it, which I find really frustrating sometimes, because even though you've got a stereo DAW, there's no reason why you can't put a stereo input into an effects but get a multi-channel out.
That's true.
And route it somewhere else, because especially with the Fiedler solution, that is quite flexible to do stuff like that, because you can pull the individual channel and route it somewhere else, or route it to another Beam plugin and then pan that back into the Atmos space. You can be quite creative. Just with routing alone, it's just that, especially the VST3 format, unfortunately, it often closes all that off. You can't actually get at it. It just doesn't ever expose all the multi-channels to get to it, which is a shame.
Yeah, the kind of, I'm not a plugin developer, so I don't really know, but I just noticed that kind of the, especially kind of when we were talking about, who was it? I was talking to the APL guys that kind of are doing the virtuoso kind of binaural renderer.
Yeah.
And that actually has issues with Studio One, for example, because it does not really get the channel layout correctly.
Yeah.
And it seems to be that even though there are certain rules on how to do things, there's usually kind of the interoperability between DAWs and plugins. Kind of, I think is not as good as it could be, right? So I'm always very happy if I have like a multi-channel plugin that actually works exactly the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, I think there's so many variables for the DAW, the VST format, and the developer. Once they're all married up to each other and sort of in line with each other, you create a really nice plugin. But it's so easy to just mess up, I think.
That is true, and you probably have to think about kind of different things simultaneously, and kind of as a plugin developer, make sure that it works with all kinds of digital audio workstations, and they do work differently. I haven't really checked it, but one member in our Discord said that the channel layout that Studio One has for 9.1.6 is actually not consistent with the specifications of Atmos. The channel order. The channel order, Okay. So kind of you're working with all these little kind of quirks and things, and then you need to figure out how to do that. But I still think this is a missed opportunity. So if any plugin developers out there kind of are listening to this,
get converting. Can't be that hard. I think it probably is hard. A lot. It is hard because it's not just a case of duplicating everything by how many channels. If you did that, you just end up like the size parameter on Dolby Atmos, where you're just duplicating everything to every channel.
And you probably have to somewhere in the middle have to convert to something like ambisonics in order to make it more consistent. Because
and you probably have to use deconvolution so that you're not taking an exact replica of the sounds through every speaker, because it will start clashing with the opposite channel and stuff. So
exactly.
I'm sure there's a lot more to work.
There's probably a lot of things to it.
But that's no excuse. They should still just start converting them all.
So everybody out there, get converting. We want to buy plugins.
Exactly.
Okay.
I think that's most of what we wanted to cover.
I think we covered everything that we wanted to cover, right? So this was actually a lot of fun. So we are planning on doing that monthly. That is the intent. One of the things that we also want to do is we want to invite guests. So whoever kind of listened to us until to this point, well, first of all, thank you. But if you think kind of listening to two old guys talk might not be kind of something that I want to do every month, we're going to have guests kind of that give us a little bit more insight into how things are really done. And we have a couple of very interesting guests already lined up a little bit. So stay kind of informed. Keep in touch wherever you find this podcast. There's a second episode coming. Anything else, Sam, that you want to kind of say?
No, just get anything you want us to cover as well. Yeah, get in touch.
Yeah, exactly.
It's good to get a two-way kind of conversation going with the audience.
Exactly. So if you guys out there, if you have any interest that any topics that you want us to discuss, let us know, and we can most certainly do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty much everything that we wanted to cover today. This was a lot of fun. This was the first time I actually did a podcast episode. And Sam, I think you as well, right? I mean, this is the first time we're doing this.
Give us a break, guys. It's our first one. But thanks, Michael. It's been fun.
Okay, so thanks everybody for listening. See you at the next video. See you at the next podcast episode, wherever that's going to be. See you.
Cheers all. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.